They can hear us online, so if you want to start talking.
Yeah, just turn on the video. Hello, everyone. Sorry for the technical issues. Just gonna talk to the audience now, but you should be able to hear this online as well and see. So yeah, thank you very much for joining the launch event of the Groundwater Photo Book. I'm gonna probably hand it over to Sylvia right away because this was her brainchild initially with a Groundwater Photostory Competition. And this is the occasion where this culminates today with the launch of the photo book, and we'll also have a variety of speakers today introduce this photo book and speak to the topic with Michela Miletto, who's sharing some remarks via video, Rob Hope, who's here in person, as well as Namira, who are both here at the University of Oxford, and also Jenny Grunwell from the Stockholm International. I don't know if you also want to say some words.
Thanks, Chris. Sure. So it's very strange to be on the other side. So we graduated actually in 2018. Chris and myself were doing your course, the Water Science Policy and Management course. And just a little bit about the initiative as well. So we launched the Water Science Policy, which is a multilingual platform to share knowledge across water at the intersection of nature, health, economics. And we started really during the pandemic in 2020. So Chris and myself are the co-founders of Water Science Policy. And after that, our network, we're about 100 people right now. We're all volunteers because we all have full-time jobs. But so this is sort of a passion project for us. Yeah, so we decided last year to launch a groundwater photo competition. Why? Because it is well, I mean, the water sector is already difficult and complex and challenging, and there's so many intersections, but groundwater is even more challenging because it's water that you cannot see. So we just decided that since 2022 was the UN groundwater, so the theme of the UN water event was groundwater, we just decided to launch and to launch for the competition. We partner up with some organizations, among which as well, and they really helped us leverage the call. And so we received more than 100 applications from all over the world. And so this book is just, sorry, I'm just looking at different places because they're sorting out logistics and cameras. And so basically the book is the result of the photo competition. We selected 19 photo stories that you can also see. We launched a crowdfunding campaign, but we also printed out some of the copies of the book so you can see it. So with the crowdfunding, we're actually aiming at printing more books, goodies that you can buy. But really the idea is to present the book today and to also talk a little bit through the photo stories and the different regions of the world that we selected. There are photo stories from India, Brazil, so Europe, so really all around the world. So this is just a brief introduction. So I guess I will hand over now to, I guess, Rob or
Okay, so
The video is there now.
is it there? Okay. Great. Well, thanks to everybody in person who's joining today and those that are online. It's great to see you and to join this amazing initiative. I mean, I think, huge credit to Chris and Sylvia and the team at Water Science and Policy for having the initiative and the ingenuity to develop this program of work. As Sylvia's mentioned, this is the UN's year for groundwater. So it's incredibly important, as I think most of us recognize, but not globally, at least anyway, in terms of many of the issues that are faced. I think we've already got something up there that I wanted to talk to. But the first thing I wanted to sort of say was, congratulations to the team. This is a really important initiative, and we're going to get into the detail with some great speakers as we start. Often people talk about groundwater, about making the invisible visible, and it's a bit of an old hackneyed phrase, but I saw this piece of research that came out last month in Science magazine from a colleague and friend, Dr. Mohammed Shamsuddua, that was looking at groundwater in the Bay of Bengal. So this is an area that we've been, Oxford's been involved in research for a number of years. And the work that he and his team have been doing has just been fascinating in terms of just showing the very material benefits of groundwater at an enormous scale. And in particular, the sort of interactions between human and the environment. So the Bay of Bengal in this area of Bangladesh is where the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna rivers flow. So sort of over 90% of the flow comes through into Bangladesh each year. I mean, it's a huge flooding event following the monsoons in sort of, June, July period. What they were looking at was this hypothesis that in terms of how farmers, literally millions, about 16 million farmers who have very shallow tube wells, and they irrigate a dry season crop of rice, the Bora crop of rice, how that is affecting groundwater in this area. And what the research shows, and what they call the Bengal water machine, which I think is a great name, is how these 16 million farmers in the dry season, they draw up shallow water, all independently doing this work to create the rice crop. And then as the floods come down, this leads to higher recharge in this area. And what this team has done is sort of quantify it, and it's just astonishing the numbers that are involved. It's more than double the reserve capacity of the Three Gorges Dam or the Hoover Dam. I mean, it's just a phenomenal amount of water, which is hard to comprehend. But this, this provides, food security within Bangladesh, employment, jobs, etc. And it's there's no other way that they would be able to irrigate these sort of crops at this period. You get similar phenomena in India as well, in the Ganges. Some parts of the Ganges basin work around this, but it gives you some sense of the scale and the impacts that groundwater has around the world. Some of the speakers in the book will talk to issues around access and the challenges there, and it's an area of research that I'm involved in terms of certainly in rural areas of Africa and Asia, providing drinking water and productive water to people. And groundwater is often the only resource that's available, particularly in drier periods. There are major issues around contamination, and Amira is going to sort of talk us through that as well. There's often groundwater isn't of high quality. There's often a misalignment or a misview that groundwater is naturally clean. But there are sort of natural contaminants in the water. So in Bangladesh, the arsenic story, I think, is quite well known. In other parts of the world, it might be fluoride or other natural contaminants. So these are things that need to be carefully considered as well, and Namira will help us talk through that. And then there are issues of over abstraction as well. And so we're very fortunate to have Professor Azat Biswas with us, I think, who's going to talk to some of these issues. And they certainly play through in different parts of the world in terms of the very poor sustainable management of groundwater. And this is one of the governance challenges that we face, because we often lack the data or the institutions to manage these systems. And it becomes a case that we often guess or we gamble with groundwater. And this is problematic for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's a record of the past. The groundwater often is described as uses. There's some of those that can be recharged from hundreds or thousands of years ago. It also represents the management choices we face today, and this is our generation and what we do with the water in terms of how we manage it sustainably and protect it, and also the legacy we leave for future generations, what we've done with this. And human society across the world has created a lot of harm with groundwater, particularly in terms of deteriorating quality, contamination through an industrial or agricultural pollution. And we're only starting to understand some of these things. And this, for me, I mean, the concluding comments is why this book is fantastic, because if we can't see this or communicate this in an effective way, it's very difficult to take action. And so a photo book, I think, is a fabulous idea in terms of how we can try and engage wider audiences to sort of promote and discuss and find ways to go forward. And I think there are positive things. There are a lot of negative things talked about groundwater, but I think there's a lot of positive action that we can take as well. So I'm going to conclude there and then pass over Chris, who's coming next. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rob. Thanks. Great. In view of time, and because Asit was kind enough to join us on such short notice, he actually has another appointment in a couple of minutes. So I would ask you, Asit, to go next if you're ready. You're muted. You're still muted.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Yes. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. The main reason I have to leave in a few minutes, I have a major dental surgery. I have to go from here. I'm not looking forward to it, but that's what it is. I want to share you some of my views on groundwater. One of the problems with the groundwater is basically neglected by the policymakers, basically neglected by the water profession. In one way, groundwater is the stepchild of water management. I remember when I was graduating from Indian Institute of Technology, probably we had 20 lectures on surface water compared to one lecture on groundwater. And yet groundwater plays a major role in India for a whole variety of purposes. And it has stayed the same. Most universities now still in their engineering courses, and most of the people involved in water management are engineers. They do not get a clear perspective on groundwater, its importance, how to manage groundwater properly. And that has remained the same in the last 50 years. Little bit, it has improved a little bit, but not very much. We have problems. I've been advising 23 governments on the water issues. I don't know a single government anywhere in the world who has a clear idea or map of groundwater they have. Even in the Middle East countries, groundwater is very important. In addition to desalinated water, they don't have very much surface water, but they don't have any idea. Virtually most Middle Eastern countries don't have any idea how much groundwater there is, where it is stored, how much can be extracted. And that goes to not only Middle East, but if you take US, we have the same problem. The rules and regulations on groundwater were developed when the population was low, water demand was low, prior to 1940s, 1930s. And the rule still is in most parts, in many parts of the world, the person who holds the land has unlimited access to groundwater. If you look at California, we did a study of the last California drought. The reason why the total economic production during the drought, agricultural production during the drought in California did not decline, at least in terms of total cost, is primarily because the farmers shifted to high value crops and went deeper and deeper to extract groundwater. And our estimate for the last drought, not the current one, the last drought, the Californian farmers, only the electricity bill for that groundwater extractions over $600 million. That's just on the electricity bill. And we have the same problem most of parts of the world. In India, for example, since 1960s, India's population started to grow. Urbanization increased, water use went up exponentially, and much of the emphasis has been on surface water management. We still in India, we do not know where the groundwater reservoirs are. Forget the quality, we don't know how much quantity there is. And of course, the quality is a vexing issue, even worse than surface water. Basically, in India at present, if you monitor 16 to 20 surface water quality parameters, you are doing quite well on a regular basis. And yet, there are so many contaminants now. Singapore, a government I advise, Singapore Public Utilities Board, which provides the water to Singapore, now regularly monitors 351 water quality parameters. In most groundwater quality, virtually, except for a few, we really don't know either the quantity and quality. And I don't see anything changing in the near future. If you look in the US, one of the most advanced country of the world, the Olagala aquifer is in a bad shape. We heard the Indo-Gangetic aquifer. In fact, according to NASA, this is the second most stressed aquifer system in the whole world. And the water levels are going down. And it is a very strange situation. We talked about, the speaker before me talked about the Delta area in Bangladesh. But the fact is, if you look at India and Bangladesh, if you start from the north, the breadbasket of India, Punjab, Rajasthan, groundwater is at a very low level, primarily because of the Green Revolution and some very bad policies that were put into practice in the 1970s for that time for the right reason, but right now they're the wrong reason. So if you look at Rajasthan and Punjab, the two breadbasket of India, much of it comes from the groundwater, the agriculture. Each year, the groundwater is going down, down, down. In some parts of Punjab, now they're going down by 1 meter per year. And we're coming to the stage, we really don't know what's going to happen. But the fact is, in Punjab and Rajasthan, the breadbasket, the groundwater is at a very low level, at a much lower level, at a much deeper level. Quality of the groundwater is poor, but the agricultural production is extremely high. Then you go farther east or northeast, southeast, you come to the West Bengal, Bihar, Orissa. Groundwater is at a low level. The groundwater is at comparatively easily accessible. Quality is good, but the production yield is remarkably low. And I have still not understood why the Punjab and Rajasthan can have a high yield with such a poor groundwater quality and the depth of groundwater, why in Bangladesh, India, Bangladesh, Orissa, West Bengal, Bihar cannot have similar production regime. So when you talk of food security, it's not only the groundwater that's available, but how the farmers are using it. So this is one of the big problems we're facing. The other problem is the climate change, especially in the monsoon area. What is happening, we are quite sure now, the climate change is making monsoon much harsher, increasingly much harsher and more erratic. And so this climate, we really still do not fully understand what are the implications of this erratic monsoon is going to be, and how do we take steps to recharge groundwater. And the problem is, most people don't realize people who are in the temperate zone, do not realize the seasonality of groundwater. Take a place like Delhi. Delhi's annual rainfall is not that different from London. It's about 10, London is about 10% more average annual rainfall. But in Delhi, most of the water that falls actually falls in about the yearly, whatever is the average yearly rainfall, 80% of that average rainfall occurs in 90 hours in a year or less during the monsoon season. So the question is, how do we take such enormous amount of rain that falls in a very short time, as a result of which groundwater recharge is not as good as it could be? It basically, we see the sheet flow and it flows down the rivers and then to the oceans. So we have to start, if you're thinking of food security, water security for countries like India, we have to start thinking about how do we change our groundwater management. And the biggest problem I see is my Indian colleagues and the Asian colleagues, they're so enamored by the Western science. We look at the Western solutions to groundwater management. I'm afraid the groundwater management under monsoon conditions is very different than groundwater management in temperate region. And this is a difference that is still not being understood or realized neither by the Western groundwater specialists, and what is sad, even by the South Asian groundwater specialists who actually live there. So these are some of the problems we see. The problems are enormous. The Green Revolution has made a lot of difference. And because in 1974, I remember one of the things when I was asked to evaluate a Uttar Pradesh groundwater project financed by IFAD and the World Bank, the first question I asked the government of India, why did you agree to have a groundwater pumping system, which is available to the farmers 24 hours a day, and the people in the major cities had electricity for 8 to 10 hours a day, but the farmers had 24 hours a day. And they said this was a condition that was imposed by the donors in the 1970s in order to increase the food production. Sure enough, it increased the food production, but what happened is the farmers got used to this idea of getting free electricity to pump the hell out of groundwater. As a result, India is having a problem. And as you all know, once you give a subsidy, it's politically almost impossible to withdraw it. So Indians are trying to work on the margin, but the problem is still serious. Mr. Modi did quite a few good things in Gujarat, but that only goes part of the way. But the major problem is in countries like India, how do we manage groundwater properly? And the sad fact is now India extracts more groundwater than USA and China put together. And these are some of the statistics that are frightening. And sadly, I still do not see any effort by the Indian government to manage water. There's a lot of talk about monitoring. A few years ago, the parliament came out some rules and regulations and suggested some monitoring to see how much ground available mapping. Nothing has happened. And this is one of the problems. We have policies, but they are not being implemented. So I'm a little afraid of many of these countries because of climate change, unless we are able to store water by all means, groundwater storage, surface water storage, small dams, large dams. I think we're asking for trouble when we are going to see such extreme variations in weather, from high floods to prolonged droughts. With that, I will finish here, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. And one thing I very much like of the WSP is they are bringing some of these technical issues in the simple way to the attention of the general public. Before, the academics, basically, we used to write in academic papers and we are satisfied. And now, thanks to WSP, the public actually knows what these problems are, And I commend WSP to what they're doing to do even more. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asit, for the support and also for joining us before your dental appointment. Much appreciated. Okay, so I think now comes some, well, Michela Mileto is the director of the UNESCO World Water Assessment Program. And as I said before, UNESCO was supportive of the initiative and generally supportive of activities that we do at WSP. She's not, she couldn't be here today on a call, so she recorded a video and we wanted to play the video. It's just a short greetings from her. Having some few issues technically. I think the video is coming up now. Thanks for your patience. Yeah. There's so many screens. We don't know what we're showing. So the virtual space is not helping sometimes. Yeah.
Good morning or good afternoon. As coordinator of the UNESCO World Water Assessment Program, I'm very glad to support.
We have Michela's in the room. Sorry about that.
There we go. Well, now it's online.
Is it on Zoom?
No, it's not.
Yeah, I have to computer. Change the screen on the Zoom now.
Okay. Good moment.
The joys of hybrid events.
Water science policy for the launch of the Groundwater Photobook. This publication is particularly important because it addresses a topic that is often underrepresented and overlooked by the general public. Moreover, groundwater, the invisible resource, is the theme of the 2022 edition of the United Nations World Water Development Report, which has been presented during the World Water Day last March at the World Water Forum in Dakar, at the presence of several heads of states of the African region. But why groundwater is so important to devote the annual UN report on water resources to this topic? First, because a quarter of the fresh water we use and half of the water we drink comes from groundwater. Second, because groundwater is everywhere, although in different quantities. Moreover, it is not severely affected by the extreme climatic effects as the surface waters are, so it is a remarkable resource to be used in climate change adaptation. Nonetheless, in spite of its overall abundance, groundwater remains vulnerable to overexploitation and pollution. In other words, it is a fragile natural resource that needs to be protected through sustainable integrated water management and governance. I said before that very often groundwater is overlooked or poorly understood, or simply people don't know about it because it is not visible. It is hence quite difficult to take a picture to groundwater, with the exception of when it reaches the surface in the form of a spring. Nonetheless, there are many ways to transfer a clear message about this invisible resource. And sometimes a picture tells 1,000 words and can help turn abstract concepts into tangible realities. The WSP Photobook demonstrated that this is possible. The UNESCO World Water Assessment Program is delighted to have supported the Water Science Policy's Groundwater Photo Competition, shining a light on the beauty, complexity, and challenges of such crucial resource. This unique initiative has helped to give visibility to groundwater to the large public who learned about it. We can already see the impact that this means of communication has produced just in a few months. I wish Water Science Policy good luck with the Photobook launch. We hope to see more initiatives like this one in the future. UNESCO WAP always stand alongside those who adopt art to speak science. Thank you very much. Good morning, or
Thank you for bearing with us. It's a bit of a show. Nice. Anyway.
Okay. Yeah, so basically, I mean, we just introduced what the aim of the book. We received photo stories from all over the world. Of course, as you may know already, groundwater, as also Professor Biswas was saying, is a major issue in India and Bangladesh, but you would be surprised also to see that it's related also to issues that we have in Europe. And we had the photo stories from Belgium, contamination story from Germany, Serbia. So really, you can see from the world map that it was a worldwide competition. So just to give you some numbers about us, about water science policy, as I said, and we can talk about later because we also have some drinks and foods for you later. So basically, we started in 2020, and so far we have done quite a lot considering that we are volunteer-based. So we have received some small funding from different donors and also some donations, but really this is an initiative that Chris and myself have put together. But at the same time, we now have more than 100 volunteers from all over the world. We have one is over there at the back. And we met for the first time today because we've never met in person. So this whole initiative started during the pandemic. I was living in the Philippines because I work in the Philippines, and Chris was in Canada. So we just decided, why don't we launch a blog? So this started as a blog. As a blog on WordPress. So what you see on the left-hand side is actually the blog version of it. And actually that was Chris that put together the entire WordPress site, and it was actually quite amazing. I liked it. Then we got a bit more, well, more professional because we have a proper website now, and as you can see, we really try to use sort of the approach that you're learning also on the course. I mean, presumably you're all from the Water Science Policy and Management course, but really the idea is to sort of link water to all the different aspects of our life. So we started, as you can see, in 2021. That was the second version of the website that is sort of mirrors what the approach that we used during the course. And now we try to, in May 2022, actually, we became an association. We became a social enterprise in Germany. So we are actually able to also gather funding. We hopefully we will walk on our legs soon. And of course, we're always happy to have people writing for the magazine. We have so many different formats. You can take pictures, you can write blogs about your work. You can really do, I don't know, a documentary, whatever you have in mind, and it's related to water. It's really the place where you can just have your creativity satisfied. So just a little bit about ourselves and who we are and why we did this. So really the idea is that, of course, water is sort of sometimes, I don't know, but if you talk to your friends, it can be a boring topic and nobody understands what really is. And people think, okay, water is about utilities. It's about the water that you drink. It's actually not. I mean, water is about everything we do, of course. And now in times of climate change, and we've seen even in the UK, a drought, who would have thought, right, that maybe rivers can dry up in the UK. But I mean, that's happening worldwide. The reason why people really don't link the dots is because in our view, there's not so many outlets that simplify the concept. And so there's also like a catastrophic approach about why we talk about, I don't know, climate change is a catastrophe, right? But what about solutions? What about pictures? What about solutions that have worked maybe somewhere in the world that could be replicated, or simply people who have innovative ideas that could be applicated somewhere else? So this is really the reason why we try to bridge science and communication, and in the end also art, to really try to link all these concepts together. And to make also nice products, like, for instance, a book of photos. So yeah, I mean, our idea is actually to sort of like serve what we call the water rock stars. What it means is that these are people that really have a passion, and the passion is really to get the word out there, and also to work in different ways to contribute to such an important natural resource. And so we do this by bringing together science, communication, and arts. And also, of course, although it's really, I mean, we know in this room that water is important, but not everyone really makes the link with it. And so really the idea is that if you really want to have impact, but it's hard to see it, then it seems that nobody cares about water. So we really try to take these scientific topics and bring them out of the School of Geography, for instance, and so to make them available to sort of like to more people outside of the scientific world as well. So with pictures, with documentaries, etc. So we have already gone through the openings and the speech from Asit. So you may know, I mean, Asit is a very well-renowned professor. He's worked for so many years, I think more than 50, at least 30 or 40 years around the world, just providing policy advice for the Indian government, China. So he works really across. He was at Singapore University before, now he's in Glasgow. So and also he's been very supportive of our initiative since the beginning. So we're really happy to hear from him. And yes, I mean, now we just wanted to make the format a little bit more sort of also visual. So we're going to talk through some of the photo stories that we have collected in the book. And so the first one is about accessibility, because one thing that we didn't mention is that the book collects the stories across three main areas. So accessibility, contamination, and over extraction, which are the three main areas that we groundwater cuts across. So Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Sylvia.
I'm just pausing.
Right, so one of the first stories on accessibility, actually one that we came across at World Water Week a few weeks ago, is one that started with the Grundfos Foundation and the University of Aarhus in Denmark. And what they have done and then also documented with photography, actually by researchers in this case, is their so-called TTEM system. The TTEM system is a towed transient electromagnetic system that is ground-based, compact, highly efficient, and towed. They have applied that in various occasions, not only in a low and middle income country context, also back home in Denmark to assess groundwater vulnerability, contamination, and other not even only limited to groundwater soil characteristics. But it works really well to understand where you have groundwater and where you may want to drill your wells. And that has been one of the primary applications of this system in places like Zimbabwe. This here is a refugee camp in Zimbabwe or close to one. And the Grundfos Foundation has financed this campaign, and the University of Aarhus folks went there and helped map the area with the TTEM system that they have. It's on a slat, and it's just being like run over the land, and as it goes, it scans the ground, and you can real time see on an iPad, for example, or on any workbench that they have, where you have groundwater potentially. And a number of those campaigns have been very successful in other countries. This one only finished in July this year. And here you see some of the people in Zimbabwe. This guy here is obviously from Denmark, telling them or showing them how the system works this year. And those are the locals. And it has worked remarkably well, and they're trying to expand that further. It's in its third generation now, as I understand, and is a very nice way to showcase solutions around groundwater challenges in terms of accessibility that many people face. That's one of the photo stories. And now over to Namira.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Namira. I'm a DPhil student here at the School of Geography and Environment. I also did my MSc in WSPM with Chris and Sylvia. So it's really nice to be here today to talk about groundwater. It feels very full circle. I will be talking specifically about the theme of contamination in groundwater. So firstly, I'll go over some examples and some of the main causes of groundwater contamination. Firstly, we have microbial contamination, and we have some incredible examples of cases of contamination in various parts of the world. So in 1997 in North London, there was a case of cryptosporidium, which caused 345 cases of illness. In 2000 in Walkerton, Ontario, there was a particularly deadly strain of E. coli, as well as Campylobacter, which caused over 2,000 cases and 7 deaths. More recently in New Zealand, there were over 5,000 cases and 4 deaths, also due to Campylobacter. There's also geogenic contamination. We've heard a little bit more about this from the previous speakers. So for example, in the Ethiopian Rift Valley, there are about 8 million people exposed to high levels of fluoride. In Bangladesh, there are over 20 million people, possibly a lot more than that, exposed to high levels of arsenic currently. And then there are chemical pollution sources. So there are some famous cases such as chromium-6 contamination in Hinckley, California. There's a famous Oscar-winning movie about it called Erin Brockovich, named after the law clerk who helped bring the case to light. There's also over a century's worth of acid mine drainage in South Africa. And many of you may have heard of forever chemicals or perfluorinated, polyfluorinated compounds. And they're over, just in the US alone, there are over 2,000 points of contamination of drinking and groundwater sources. So recently, Professor Katrina Charles and I published a paper on looking at comparative policy analyses on four different contamination events, 3 of which were of groundwater sources. And I'll be talking a little bit more in detail about some of these cases and what makes them interesting. So in Walkerton, the source of the bacteria was from manure from nearby farmland. It went into the groundwater through the nature of the hydrogeology of the area. There's highly soluble rocks and highly porous rocks, which made it easy for the contamination to reach the groundwater quite fast. However, the actual outbreak was attributed due to operational failures and lack of chlorination at the water treatment plant. So the plant operators at the time were not adequately trained, they did not follow any guidelines, and they falsified data. Also, the Ministry of Government at the time did not ensure regulatory compliance, which was within their remit to do so, which, as I said, resulted in over 2,000 cases of illness and 7 deaths. But this was actually a rare case where the policy response and the process that followed after the contamination was successful. There was an inquiry that started within weeks, and new regulations, provisional regulations were enacted almost immediately, and then more long-term changes took place over the next 2 years. So new policies were enacted, such as the Safe Drinking Water Act. They adopted a watershed-based and risk-based approach to setting water quality standards. And standards were made actually legally enforceable with strict monitoring plans and mandatory training and certification of operators. Then we have a more difficult case, which is arsenic in Bangladesh, one of the primary focuses of my DPhil. So this started in the 1970s and 80s. Shallow tube wells in rural areas were installed, millions of them were installed across the country to reduce reliance on surface water sources to prevent diarrheal disease and under 5 child mortality. However, this unknowingly exposed at the time between 35 to 57 million people to arsenic, which was then an unknown contaminant of shallow aquifers. So these were naturally, the arsenic was naturally deposited during the Holocene period, so it's in the upper layers. However, the problem was not officially recognized until 2 decades later, almost, in 1993, even though in the 1980s, a doctor in West Bengal in India had already diagnosed patients who had come from Bangladesh, and he had ruled out causes other than groundwater. So he determined it was from the tube wells, the water that they were drinking from the tube wells. The first policy on this was not enacted until 2004. And the main response in terms of implementation were from development organizations. And it was a set of patchy and disjointed short-term programs that mainly focused on screening the existing wells and providing deeper tube wells, many of which have not sustained in the long run, many of which are now in a state of disrepair, or people don't like to drink from them because they are too far away, or they don't like the aesthetic quality of the water coming out of those tube wells. And so people resort to continuing to drink from shallow tube wells, which they know are contaminated. The response has also been marked very acutely by misallocation of resources. There's quite a lot of evidence pointing to this, and the Department of Public Health Engineering, which is a part of the Bangladesh government, have themselves recognized that there is a big gap between where resources are really needed in the highly contaminated areas and where they're actually provided, which is mostly in areas that don't need these resources as much. Moving on to the final case I'm going to talk about is chromium-6 in Hinckley. So the Pacific Gas and Electric Station in Hinckley used chromium-6 in their compressors as an anti-corrosive. And between 1952 to 1966, they dumped over about 370 million gallons of wastewater containing chromium-6 into unlined ponds. That percolated into the groundwater and contaminated private wells. So for context, Hinckley is a very small unincorporated town in the middle of the desert in California. It's not governed by its own municipality. It's governed by the larger county. And so most people are reliant on private drinking water wells. So PG&E actually did not notify the regional water authority that about the contamination until 1987. So long after they knew that they had dumped this toxic waste and it had spread through the groundwater. After they had notified the local authorities, they were asked to clean up the plume. And it's a task that's still ongoing, still not done. And in the meantime, Hinckley has basically become a ghost town. Most people have left. Schools have closed down, churches have closed down. There's not much left in that town. The response to the chromium-6 contamination is quite interesting because there was a lot of dubious actions by scientists and the industry around the harmful effects of chromium-6. So there was instances of falsification of data. There were scientists paid by the industry who did not declare conflicts of interest, etc. There have been papers pulled from journals for falsifying data. And what this did is similar to the anti-vax movement, where even when you debunk these claims, once the ball is rolling, once doubt is cast, it's very difficult to come back from that. So the US still does not have a federal standard for the maximum contaminant level for chromium-6. They only have one on total chromium, which is not very meaningful because chromium-3 is actually an essential nutrient. And there was some positive development in 2014 where California, the state, adopted a separate MCL of 10 micrograms per liter based on public health recommendations. But this was struck down in court not long after in a case that was brought against the California Department of Public Health by the California Manufacturers and Technology Association. And this was not based on any doubt about the actual MCL value. It was not about the adequacy of the public health protection. It was simply because the court determined that the Department of Public Health did not adequately document why this MCL was economically feasible. So the manufacturers won out over public health in this case. And it is still in a state of, it's blanketed in a state of doubt. Even though there's quite a lot of mounting evidence of how harmful chromium-6 actually is. So yeah, groundwater, as we've, I think, all mentioned, it's a vital resource. It stores vast amounts of water that a lot of people rely on. And despite decades of research and knowledge on the toxic impacts from microbial, chemical, and geogenic contaminants, there's still the assumption, as Rob said, that groundwater is safe until it's proven otherwise, right? So we need to recognize that there are many threats to groundwater. It's not always as safe or as clean as it might seem. And then it's not just the contaminants themselves, there's also various socio-political factors, such as the lack of regulation, government inaction, such as interests of industries and lobbies that can continue to threaten the quality of precious groundwater resources, as we see from these cases. So we need to ensure the protection and treatment to manage the threats to the ecosystems it supports and to the people that rely on groundwater for drinking and various other domestic purposes. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Namira. Okay, great. And following in that routine, there's a photo story, of course, also on contamination that we're briefly going to present. This is one from IAWAC, which is the Swiss Aquatic Research Institute at the ETH Zurich, also combined with pictures from C4, which is the Center for Investigative Forestry and whatnot. And it is a story that is built around the use of AI and machine learning to map fluoride contamination in Ghana. And as Namira just said, just because it's groundwater, it's not always safe to drink. Even naturally, that is not always the case. Fluoride and arsenic are some of those examples. Fluoride, as you may know, in excessive quantities can contribute to dental fluorosis, amongst other bone-related problems if consumed in too great quantities. And this is about a exercise that the researchers at IAWAC did. They basically took existing samples and then merged that with other variables that they already knew in terms of soil characteristics across the country, and water levels, precipitation, etc. And by feeding their model with all this data, they were able to predict and then in the field verify the fluoride contamination of groundwater in Ghana. And the level, the cutoff here is 1 milligram per liter, which is used as safe or not safe. And what they found is that particularly in the northern parts of Ghana, there is quite a bit of a problem with fluoride in groundwater. And well, that's all neatly mapped. And again, there's more maps in the photo book and more images to go through. And another example of solutions around groundwater contamination in this case. This story is also written up as a blog on water science policy and has audio versions as well. Those are some of the pictures that accompany it. Yeah, sure. And now over to Jenny, who's going to briefly introduce over extraction, which is the section that she contributed to for the photo book. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you so much. Hello, good afternoon or good evening or good morning, everyone. So I was asked to contribute with a foreword on over extraction. And of course, this being a photo book, I saw the challenge in writing something about what does over extraction look like? How can we illustrate something like this, like depletion, drought, etc.? Because this year, when the groundwater community and the rest of the world is thinking very much about how to make the invisible more visible, how to see the unseen, there are various ways of doing that. There's a way of representing groundwater in the ground, whether it comes out as in springs or it is pumped up. But depletion and groundwater extraction, a sinking water table, how do you represent that? Because we're really talking about something that is very, very hidden underground. Over extraction can mean that we're talking about an empty reservoir, a void. Sometimes we can see it because the surface of the ground and the rocks, the soil has been compacted, and we see land subsidence. There's some photos of that, not in this photo book, but others where it's very clear that something has happened. And when you're then told that this is because groundwater has been taken out, this becomes a bit more visible to us. And science, of course, has moved forward in terms of illustrating groundwater absence, for instance, through GRACE satellite images. I think I first saw those satellite images back in 2015, and I was then doing research still on India. And it was very clear how the irrigation in the northwestern part of the country has caused several meters of drawdown on the groundwater. And today we can also illustrate groundwater and hydrogeology more in 3D models, for instance, and thereby trying to illustrate where groundwater is and also where it is not. But the problem and the challenge remains that how can we make it understood to people who depend on groundwater that something that is a known unknown, the risks of over extraction, the risks of depletion that come primarily because of withdrawals exceeding replenishment rates, and because human actions disturb the balance between discharge and recharge. How do you show that cause and effect to someone who well, doesn't have a scientific understanding, sometimes doesn't even really understand or know about a water cycle, and to whom climate change and variability is something very abstract and yet very much felt in real life. I grew up in a rural area not far from Stockholm, the capital of Sweden, and of course everyone there had their own wells. And no one had any problems with scarcity or groundwater depletion back then. But today, when I speak to people in that very area, drought and a sinking groundwater table is a reality for more and more people. And I have friends and relatives who rely on their own wells, who live in the inner archipelago outside the city of Stockholm, who live in this constant fear and stress that how much rain will there be this summer? Will my well, my aquifer, will it actually recharge? Or will I have another summer where I need to be really, really careful with how much water I draw? Should I invest in one of those expensive apps and maybe other different technology to get more control over how much water there is in my well? And what about the larger system? And what about if there's a new neighbor coming in the same area and drilling a deeper well? So all of those things are there at the back of the head and sometimes very upfront for very many people in my country. And I think that if this photo book competition had been open during the summer this year, you would probably have had many more pictures also from continental Europe and Sweden, because groundwater drought is a fact more visible here now as well. I started really caring for groundwater when I started doing my PhD research in India. And after my first field visit to Bangalore in the south of the country in 2004, I left thinking that, oh, there's not going to be any groundwater there when I come back the next time, because the overdraft is so massive and everyone's so worried. And of course, half a year later, when I did come back, there was still groundwater in the wells. But the problems were there then, and they still are. And my field work very much came to concentrate to the peri-urban areas. And the city grew so rapidly during the years I was doing my field work there, that it was very, very obvious that those people who moved in from the countryside, selling off their land and moving to high-rise buildings at the outskirts, they very quickly realized that they had no water. They had to source their drinking water via tankers and other ways, because their own wells that they had at their compounds, they dried out very, very quickly. So when I think of over extraction, I really try to see the people on the ground. I try to think along socio-hydrogeology lines, trying to think interdisciplinary and really see the people and their stories and their lived realities. And I think that is extremely important, whether you're a researcher or you work in any other business connected to groundwater, that you understand the stress that it means to be aware to some extent of that groundwater is precious and that your well is vulnerable to weather and this abstract climate variability thing, and that you can do rather little about it. One photo that I would very much like to see in terms of solutions is rainwater harvesting. And that is also something I have seen very much in India. And there are, of course, great ways of ensuring that you capture the rain that comes and ensure that aquifers are recharged that way. And I will stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Very inspiring.
Thank you.
We're gonna hand it over.
Oh.
No, right.
There's no-
Maybe this is a question to the new students as well. What do you think this is? As in, what does it show? Yeah, exactly. So the red area is the actual size of the aquifer, and the gray one is relative to the actual area, the size that it would have to be in order to sustain current extraction levels. So extraction levels in the Upper Ganges, for example, are 26.1 times higher than what it actually could sustain in the long term. Bear in mind that this is from a 10-year-old study, so it's probably different numbers now. But I find that always is a very impressive illustration. Right, and yeah, over extraction, like Jenny said, is something very invisible to people, to everyone, even to ecosystems for a while. And one of the features that the book has is also it tries to illustrate a lot of these invisible phenomena and issues that groundwater faces. And with this in mind, I'm going to hand it over to Sylvia, who's going to present a couple of photo stories on overextraction.
I'm just mindful of time because it's already 5:20, so I will not drag it so long, but just to show you some other pictures, and then of course you can have a look at the book and enjoy them. So this one, because so in the book you will find a lot of pictures, especially access related to India, of course, because it's a very major issue in India, but overextraction is also a problem in other regions of the world. And so this photo story actually shows a story from Brazil, specifically from Western Bahia, which is considered sort of the bread basket of Brazil. And so this was a landscape, a savanna of dry forests and grasslands. But in the last 30 years, more or less, the environment has completely changed, because as you can see from the long pump, the very huge pumping, and also the sprinklers, so the plains from the lands, so from Bahia, have been converted into crops, and so irrigated crop fields for different type of crops, as you can imagine, sugar canes, but also soy. And so they started a small scale, and then they became large scale farming systems. And so you can imagine that, of course, they extract a lot of groundwater, and this has also caused some issues with the local communities. So the pumps are diverting water from the Ariohado River, and then they are diverted to the Fazendo Rio Claro, which is a large scale farm. And the Arrohado River is one of the Bahia's largest rivers. So you can really see some of the pictures in the photo story. So here, for instance, you can see a little bit more about the scheme, the pumps that then drive to the irrigation scheme. Here there is a farmer on the side, and I think those are the sugar canes. So that's one of the main crops that they're cultivating now. And here you can also see the desperate phase of this farmer in this very dry scenario of what probably used to be a canal. These are some of the pictures that you can also find into the book. And this is the fazenda that I was talking about. So this is where the huge irrigation scheme is then going to be is then used for the crop farming. And then, of course, I mean, the farmers are not the ones that are benefiting from it, because a lot of it is then exported from Brazil to other countries, right? So there was also, I think, a protest in 2017, and so it's a very good time also because there's elections in Brazil. So we will all see how this will turn out, because for sure the actual president doesn't really care a lot about the environment, but let's see. So fingers crossed. So a more another interesting story actually about groundwater is this one that is taken from the Pantanal. So the Pantanal is one of the largest wetlands, and so I think it comes. So it's in Brazil, but it's also transboundary river system, and I think it's between Paraguay and Bolivia, if I'm not wrong. But anyway, it's one of the largest wetlands, and it's the size of England and Scotland together. So you can see it's very huge. The story here is that really the wetland is fed also by groundwater, and so especially during periods of droughts and so evaporation, the groundwater is really important here to really keep the vegetation of the wetland. And as you can see, are some of the amazing pictures that we also have in the book. You can find more. So now the sale pitch. All this was about, no, I'm just joking. So as we said, so the book is actually printed, like you can see there some copies there. But really, I mean, we are a non-profit organization. So we launched a crowdfunding campaign. We had a very huge well, we had a goal of reaching 12,000 euros or dollars, doesn't matter, but anymore. And we reached now around 3,000, I think, which is great, but it could be better. So what you can find on the crowdfunding campaign is the book, but also amazing cups and tote bags, where you can carry your books and everything, or you can drink water or wine. And then we also have pictures that you can buy in different formats. So, I mean, this is about to say that if you want to buy a really nice product, oh, of course, there is also a handbound book, which is made by a friend of Chris, who is from, doesn't matter, Mexico. That was part of the story. And this is going to be beautiful because she's making the book with her hands. And so it's going to be like that. So with the same pictures, but handmade. And so this is the place where you can find the book. And perhaps you're interested in just maybe a small donation, or maybe not, but yes. It would be appreciated. And if you like the book, of course, you can buy the book. Well, I'm done with the pitch. And now, yes, and I think now you're all invited for drinks. But before that, I don't know if we have opening remarks by someone, maybe by you. Closing.
No, I don't think we do. Now this is really, I guess, also say thank you from, I guess, both of us and everyone that's involved. There's some people here that are involved in this book and in water science policy, and also the ones that are listening virtually. Sylvia said it in the beginning, but this entire book has been put together primarily by one person, and that is Xenia, who's behind a lot of the graphics on a voluntary basis at Water Science Policy. Yeah, So
So that's
big
her,
thank you
that's
to
her
her.
baby.
That is her baby, yes.
Okay.
And yeah, if you have any questions, we can answer them now virtually, in person as well. And yeah,
And thank
happy
you
to
for
chat.
bearing with us with all these 7,000 screens and and logistics.
The food and drinks is going to be in the atmosphere room, which is on this floor, just around the corner. So whenever if you want to do some questions now or take them in person later, we don't have any questions in the chat.
Right.
I'll leave it to you to decide. The wine and nibble waiting. In the atmosphere room.
Okay.
Right, okay, well then that concludes the event here in this room, and we'll head over to the drinks. Thank you.
So,